Hello there. In this video, we're going to take a look at how you can write MIDI information into Cubase without needing an external MIDI controller. So the normal way to record MIDI would be to hook up an external MIDI controller, hit record, and play the information in. Whereas in this video, I've got some lead vocals, and I'm going to use nothing but my mouse to enter the MIDI information and some chords so that there's some harmonic content around this melody that I have sitting here. The very first thing I want to point out is that you can actually play MIDI information in with your computer keypad. If you go up to the Studio menu and select On-Screen Keyboard, you can use your mouse to trigger different notes, or alternatively, you can simply play notes that correlate to those keys up on the on-screen keyboard on your computer keypad. So you can already start to figure out what key your song's in and what kind of notes you'd like to use underneath this backing. When it comes to entering notes in the MIDI editor, the very first thing we need to do is get our pencil and draw in an event. So this is like a rectangular box out here on the project window. This is going to house any MIDI information we start to enter. When we double click on it, you'll see we get the editor down in the lower zone, and we've got a piano scroll along the left. I can simply get a pencil out of the toolbox and start drawing notes in. And these notes will go for as long as I hold my mouse down and drag out to the right. Once we've entered notes, we can play them back and we can start editing them. So I could select all of them and cut them or copy and paste them up into another area. So once we've got one chord, it's kind of easy to start building other chords and just adjusting them slightly. So editing down here in the lower zone is very similar to editing up in the main project window. So it's all the same key commands, it's all the same sort of tools. It's more figuring out what notes you want and where they should go, and also trying to keep some sort of authenticity with the instrument that you're actually using on the track. So for instance, a piano player is not really going to play chords that are so far apart. So I'm just taking the top note from my chord and I'm bringing it back down again so that they're all fairly much in the same area. And that's fairly typical for a piano player. Like I said, they're not jumping around all over the place. As you can see those notes entered down in the lower zone, you'll also see them represented up there in the project window in the event. So the tools are fairly self-explanatory. You can erase, you can cut notes in half. Of course, you can drag them out, you can move them around, you can trim notes. So just basically slice right through it and it'll get rid of the rest of that note that you've trimmed. You can glue notes. At the moment, I can't glue these two notes because they're not the same note. So as soon as I move that up and grab my glue tool, then I can glue it together. So now I've got one long continuous note. For a stronger sense of timing, I can leave snap to grid on, which means that I can only edit events relative to the actual grid or the quantize settings. As soon as I turn that off, I can freely move the endpoint of that note around. I could also do things like drag this out for more of a legato or smooth feel, so one chord's going to go into the next. And there's also a drop-down menu up here in the left-hand side which deals with note length. So for instance, I can come down and ask it to remove all of the overlaps. So that will automatically get rid of all of the overlaps in this section. There's a few other things we can do in this menu. So for instance, I could shorten these notes and then use this slider to lengthen them again. And I can do that for whatever notes I have selected through the entire event. So you don't need to just use it over one note. One thing you will notice as you enter notes by hand or by mouse is that they all sound the same in terms of velocity or volume. So you can change the velocity of individual notes or a select group of notes just by selecting them and editing the velocity down in the controller lane. A really handy resource that we have for entering chordal or harmonic information are the chord pads down in the lower zone. So we've already entered information by hand, but what we can now do is find some chords that relate to the melody in our track. So I'm just using my mouse button to click on these different pads, and obviously I'm not getting the timing quite right, but I can start to come up with some sort of sketch or idea of what might actually work. In terms of what goes in the pads, in terms of chords, well, they're interchangeable and you can trigger them from an external source. There's a number of handles around the pads, so for instance, I can move the chord up and down by using the handles on the right-hand side. One of the key things is the key or chord editor, which means that I can now select different chords and add color to any basic chords that I may have. So rather than having an A minor, I've got an A minor 7, I've got a B major 7 and 9, and then on this G minor, maybe I can have another 7th or a 9th, depending on what works for you. And I can move it up and down using inversions, and that's the lower handle. And I can go to this D minor here and maybe also make that a 7th. So straight away, we've changed these relatively plain 1, 3, 5 chords, and we've turned them into something a little bit more interesting. And of course, this has probably got more flavor and more interest than what we were doing before in terms of editing or entering notes by hand just in the MIDI editor. Because you may not know how to write, a D minor 7 or an E major 7th and 9th. So the chord editor and the actual chord pads together give us a really powerful combination in terms of offering choices that we would not normally come up with. So as soon as I find a chord that I like, I simply drag it straight over. And you'll notice this time it's creating individual events for each chord, which I can edit. I'm going to show you something in a moment. I'm just going to get my chords in the general area here and make sure the chords are actually happening and the right changes. So I'll plug that guy in, and then I'm just going to put 2 of these in here at the end. And then we're going to take a quick look at how you can edit all of these. So these chord pads are all fixed note lengths. So you can see that even though I've shortened the event itself, the MIDI event down here in the lower zone is still too long. So I'm just trimming these. So the MIDI information inside each event is only as long as the event itself. So you can see this guy's gone out past the end of the event, so just trim it off. There we go. And let's do it for the rest of them. It's not necessarily important, but in terms of housekeeping and workflow, it's always good to make sure everything is neat and everything is tidy. So now that I've done that, all of my notes should be within the confines of the events. Now let's glue it all together. Now we could have removed the overlaps, so that would have been another way of doing this. At the moment, everything's still fairly robotic and plain. Now the first thing I'm going to do is select everything and increase the velocity so it's accessing a harder sample in the actual software instrument itself. Now I've maximized the window and I can go through and edit the timing of these chords that I've entered using chord pads. So once again, it's a matter of trimming anything that I want to trim and just moving the timing of these notes around. So I'm giving this whole chord progression more of a pushed feel just by moving some of the chords a little bit further ahead of the beat. And once again, it's about experimenting and finding something you like. And I think that's really starting to get there. So I could continue to edit that, but just quickly I want to show you something really cool. Once I'm happy with these chords, I can go up here to project and I can go to chord track, and now I can create some chords. So it's analyzed those notes or those chords that I put in there, and it's created its very own chord progression, which is fairly similar to the chords that we had before in the actual chord pads. So now it's triggering the whirly. So I don't actually have any MIDI information on the whirly track. It's the chords that are up in the chord track that are actually triggering the whirly instrument itself. Now this is pretty cool because it means I can go up and I can change the chord and the whirly track will change. There are a lot of videos on the Cubase YouTube channel showing you how to make music using the chord track and chord assistant, so I'm not going to go any further into it in this video. Hey, thanks for taking the time to stop by. If you've learned something, give us the big thumbs up, leave us some comments and tell us how you're using Cubase to be creative, and please subscribe to the Cubase YouTube channel for plenty more videos just like this. I'll see you there.
I bet you